This was the Ice Age. And in this unforgiving crucible, two species of humans stood face to face. One was us, Homo sapiens, the architects of cities, science, and civilizations. The other, Neanderthals, stocky, strong, skilled, and for a time, survivors. But they are not here anymore. They vanished. And their disappearance, like a bloody smear on the pages of prehistory, left behind more questions than answers. Why did they go extinct? How did we, the weaker, leaner species, outlast them? And what kind of dark truths still hide buried beneath layers of bone and ice? Because when we dig deep into the caves of Europe and sift through the remains of these ancient cousins, we find more than just primitive tools and fire-scorched stones. We find cut marks, gnawed bones, cranial cavities cracked open with purpose. This isn't just survival. This is cannibalism. And the deeper we look, the more disturbing the truth becomes, not just about them, but about us.
Roughly 400,000 years ago, long before humans painted the walls of Lascaux or walked the African savannas with spears, Neanderthals emerged in Europe and Western Asia. They evolved for the cold, broad noses to humidify dry air, muscular frames to generate heat, shorter limbs to conserve body warmth. These were not the brutish, grunting cave dwellers pop culture made them out to be. They were intelligent, resourceful, and for hundreds of thousands of years, they reigned supreme across the frozen European landscapes. They hunted mammoths, crafted stone tools, buried their dead. Some may have even adorned their bodies with pigments and worn jewelry made of animal teeth. They weren't us, but they weren't beasts either. Then, around 300,000 years ago, on another continent, something was stirring. Homo sapiens. You and me. We evolved in Africa under different pressures, leaner bodies built for endurance, social cohesion, and innovation. Our brains weren't just big, they were wired differently. Language may have been more refined, symbols held more weight. Cooperation was a survival trait, not just a luxury. And by around 70,000 years ago, we did something no other human species had managed before. We left. We crossed deserts, mountains, rivers. We followed herds. We moved with the seasons. And eventually, we arrived in Europe. Neanderthal territory. For a time, these two species overlapped. They hunted the same prey. They sheltered in the same caves. They stared into the same fires under the same bitter sky. And then, within just a few thousand years, the Neanderthals were gone. But they didn't just disappear. Something happened. Something dark.
In 1999, at a site called Moulin-Gercy Cave in southeastern France, paleoanthropologists unearthed a chilling scene. The remains of 6 Neanderthals, 2 adults, 2 adolescents, and 2 children, were found inside the cave. But they weren't buried. There were no signs of ritual, no order to their arrangement. Their bones were scattered, shattered, and marked. Not animal marks, human marks. Skulls split open, long bones cracked to extract marrow, mandibles gnawed, finger bones broken in the same way you'd process prey. The pattern was unmistakable. They had been butchered, not by wolves, not by scavengers, by other Neanderthals. At first, the scientific community hesitated. Cannibalism is a powerful claim, a dark mirror, but the evidence mounted. Other sites, from El Sidrón in Spain to Marilec in France, revealed the same eerie signs: systematic butchery, defleshing, bone fracturing. The Neanderthals weren't just dying, they were eating each other. Now, before we cast judgment from the safety of our kitchens and grocery stores, we must remember the world they lived in. This was not about taste, it was about desperation.
During the peak of the Ice Age, temperatures in Europe dropped to deadly levels. Food vanished, game animals migrated or died off, forests froze, rivers became glaciers. Even the toughest Neanderthals would have struggled to find calories. And in that abyss of starvation, the unthinkable becomes possible. When you're watching your children waste away, when there's no firewood, no prey, no hope, you turn to the only meat left: your own. This form of survival cannibalism is not unique to Neanderthals. Modern humans have done it too. But for the Neanderthals, it may have been more than a rare emergency. In some cases, it seems habitual. That is what disturbs scientists most. Because if cannibalism became a systemic response to environmental collapse, it suggests a species not only trapped by nature, but abandoned by their own fate. It paints a bleak portrait of a people who had nowhere left to turn. And yet, while Neanderthals were freezing and eating each other in caves, another species was rising. When Homo sapiens arrived in Europe roughly 45,000 years ago, the world was already hard. But somehow, we made it work. We adapted faster, hunted smarter, built stronger social networks. And we didn't just survive the cold, we outcompeted the apex predators that had ruled for millennia. In places where Neanderthals resorted to cannibalism, humans left behind art. We painted with ochre. We carved figurines. We shared stories. Our populations grew. Theirs collapsed. And eventually, our species did something that would seal the Neanderthals' fate. We may have started eating them. Yes, the cannibalism wasn't just Neanderthal to Neanderthal. Evidence shows Homo sapiens may have hunted Neanderthals not just as enemies, but as food. Some archaeologists believe Neanderthals were driven into extinction by interspecies conflict, territorial warfare, and yes, consumption. It wasn't a war of ideas. It was a war of mouths.
What if the Neanderthals never truly vanished? What if, instead of a total extinction, there was an absorption? Because while the story of Neanderthals is often painted as one of brutal conflict and extinction, another truth runs parallel beneath the surface, a quieter, more intimate one. They didn't all die. By extracting DNA from Neanderthal fossils and comparing it with modern human genome, they found something extraordinary. Some of them became us. In 2010, a team of geneticists shocked the world with a discovery that rewrote human history. Up to 2% of the DNA in non-African humans today comes from Neanderthals. This was no accident, no fluke. Multiple times, over thousands of years, across regions, from Europe to the Middle East and beyond, it meant only one thing. At some point, we mated, and not just once. This wasn't a footnote in evolution, it was a chapter. Neanderthals weren't just hunted and eaten. Some were taken as mates. Some may have chosen us, others may not have had a choice. And just like that, the brutal story takes a strange turn. What began in blood, ended in bloodlines. You carry their legacy, their struggle, their survival, not in memory, but in your cells. But what does it mean, really, to carry their genes? Let's find out. That small slice of Neanderthal DNA in our genomes isn't just symbolic, it's functional, and it's still influencing us today. Neanderthal genes have been linked to immune system responses, especially against ancient viruses, skin tone and hair texture, possibly adaptations to colder climates, sleep patterns, like circadian rhythms adapted for higher latitudes, even mood disorders, including depression and nicotine addiction. It's as if the ghosts of the Ice Age still whisper in our bodies, guiding the way we feel, look, and respond to the world. But the reversed Homo sapiens, males mating with Neanderthal, females did occur. But there's a darker side to this inheritance, because when we examine these ancient genetic fragments, we see something missing. There is almost no Neanderthal DNA on the Y. What does that mean? It suggests that Neanderthal males rarely fathered successful offspring with Homo sapiens females. Was it love, curiosity, or something else? When species collide, consent becomes a murky concept. This wasn't romance, it was survival, and survival in the Ice Age was rarely gentle. Between 40,000 and 30,000 years ago, Neanderthals slowly disappeared from the fossil record. Not in one great battle, not in a cataclysm, but like a campfire dwindling, in the snow embers fading into ash. Their last known stronghold was in southern Spain, around the Rock of Gibraltar. As Homo sapiens spread like wildfire across the continent, the Neanderthals, shrunk, outnumbered, outcompeted. Neanderthals, adapted for glacial life, may have struggled as their ecosystems shifted. Some scientists believe that climate played a part. The Ice Age climate was erratic, oscillating between extreme cold and sudden warmth. Others point to resource competition, where Neanderthals hunted in small, isolated bands. Homo sapiens formed sprawling networks, traded tools, shared food, and innovated quickly. We communicated more efficiently. Our culture spread like a virus, and when food grew scarce, we didn't hesitate to take from others, including them. And in some ways it's comforting. The image of the Neanderthal as a cannibal is one that sticks easily in our minds. It's visceral. It's horrifying. Because if they were savages, if they ate their own and lived like beasts, then their extinction earned a reaction to crisis, not a reflection of character. But that's the danger of cannibalism in Neanderthals was likely a last resort, not a culture. And when we look closely, we see that Homo sapiens did the same. Cut marks on human bones in Upper Paleolithic Homo sapiens, sites some dated to the same time period, show skulls used as drinking vessels. So who were the real cannibals? Both of us. The difference? We have the numbers, the strategy, the ruthlessness to outlive the horror. But we were no more innocent. The Ice Age didn't care about morals. It only cared about who was left standing. Perhaps the memory of the Neanderthal never left us. In the myths of ancient peoples, we find echoes of hairy wild men, cave-dwelling giants, forest spirits, the Yeti, the Bigfoot. Could these stories be distorted recollections, passed down from when humans lived side by side with another kind of human? Something bigger, wilder, other, not quite, animal, but not quite us. And maybe the stories of monsters weren't about imaginary creatures, but about the guilt buried deep in our species' memory, about the ones we outlasted, the ones we absorbed, the ones we consumed.
We like to think of extinction as a slow, natural thing. Species disappear, time marches on, and evolution unfolds like a grand and partial story. But sometimes, extinction has a name, face, a motive. Sometimes extinction is murder. And when we look at the last 10,000 years of the Neanderthal timeline, we see not just fading populations and vanishing footprints, we see a relentless rising tide. Us. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals ruled Europe. Then, in a geological blink, they were gone. And what replaced them? Not another animal. Not a shifting climate. Not a virus or a plague. Homo sapiens. Wherever we arrived, Africa, Asia, Australia, the Americas, something followed in our wake. Mass extinction. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, dire wolves. All wiped out within centuries of human arrival. Coincidence? Unlikely. Not with claws or fangs, but with strategy, numbers, and weapons. One is cautious, adapted to cold, set in their ways. The other is flexible, communicative, and growing fast. We were apex predators, embedded projectile points, healed fractures, suggesting a life lived under constant threat. Now picture this. Two human species sharing a forest, resources are scarce. Competition is fierce. Who do you think survives? They had denser bones, broader chests, and thick skulls. The fossil record reveals violent injuries on Neanderthal skeletons. Blunt force trauma to the skull. We weren't just out-evolving them, we were out-fighting them. What made us so effective? It wasn't brute strength. Neanderthals were pound for pound more muscular than us. But we had something else. Numbers. Our brains may not have been much larger, but they were likely wired for abstraction. Perhaps most importantly, we formed alliances. Our survival depended on trust. We lived in larger groups, shared information across tribes, passed on knowledge. Likely, we could coordinate ambushes, plan raids, strategize hunts. We made clothing, shelters, and tools that adapted to the environment, absorbing their power, erasing their legacy. Neanderthals, in contrast, lived in small, isolated bands. When a crisis hit, disease, famine, an ambush, they had no backup. They disappeared from one valley, then the next, and soon there was no one left. Now let's return to that chilling thread we've followed since part 1, cannibalism. If Homo sapiens killed Neanderthals and consumed them, what was the motive? Was it hunger? But what if it was more? In many cultures throughout human history, eating the enemy wasn't just for nourishment, it was symbolic, a way of dominating. Cannibalism as warfare, as conquest. Could our ancestors have done the same? The archaeological record is inconclusive, but in sites where Neanderthal bones bear cut marks and Homo sapiens artifacts lie nearby, the implications are disturbing. We may have eaten them not just because we were starving, but because it was the final insult, to dominate utterly, to consume the vanishing other, to ensure they would never come back. There's a haunting absence in prehistory. No Neanderthal cave paintings, no long-distance trade routes, no great monuments or burial mounds. What we know of them comes largely from bones and fragments filtered through our interpretations, which means in many ways they never got to tell their story. It's left no written language, no oral history, no surviving culture, just silence. Once, and yet those bones still speak. They tell of a people who cared for their wounded, who buried their dead, who learned to control fire, build tools, adapt, survive. They were not mindless, and they were not evil. They were human, just not our kind of human. It's easy to look at the Neanderthal and see the primitive other, the savage in the cave, the cannibal in the snow. What if they were the victims? What if the monster wasn't the Neanderthal but us? We who swept across continents, outbred, outnumbered, and outlasted. We who may have turned to cannibalism, not out of desperation, but opportunity. We who made sure they were the ones forgotten. And yet here we are, with their DNA inside us, constant reminder that we carry both the predator and the prey, the victor, as they say. History is written by the survivors. And perhaps that's true, but prehistory is written in bones. And the bones tell a story darker, more complex, and more human than we've ever dared admit. We want to believe that we've changed, so that the claws of desperation, which once drove us to devour our own, no longer hold us. That we've risen above the darkness our ancestors endured. But the truth is, cannibalism never fully left us. It may have gone underground, buried beneath civilization's polished veneer. But it still pulses in our mythology, haunts our history, and lives incomfortably in the edges of human behavior. Because when we confront cannibalism, we're not just confronting some distant Neanderthal ritual. We're confronting ourselves. It's deliberate, symbolic, cultural. Cannibalism is not a single act, it's a spectrum. To them, consuming the flesh of the dead was a sacred act, one of mourning, love, and ancestral respect. A cycle of death and rebirth, body and spirit, bound to cosmology. Sometimes it's done in desperation, survival, cannibalism, when starvation leaves no moral choice. Crania found in caves were sometimes arranged in patterns, suggesting they weren't just butchering for meat, but for meaning. But other times. Take the 4 people of Papua New Guinea who practiced funerary cannibalism until the mid-20th century, or consider ancient Mesoamerican cultures, where captured enemies were ritually sacrificed and eaten, not out of barbarity, but theology. Even in Neanderthal contexts, some researchers have argued that cannibalism may have had ritual significance. Maybe it was a way to honor the dead, or perhaps to claim their strength. Either way, it reminds us, cannibalism is not always rooted in madness. Sometimes it's rooted in belief. But we cannot deny the other side. It's the darker one. Even in the so-called civilized world, cannibalism has re-emerged in times of chaos. We hope it is. The Donner Party in 1846, trapped in the snowy Sierra Nevada, ate their dead to survive. In 1972, the Uruguayan rugby team, whose plane crashed in the Andes, endured the unthinkable for 72 days, resorting to cannibalism after rescue seemed impossible. A disturbing fringe, but one that proves the hunger isn't gone, except the body of the man who froze last night. During the Holodomor and Siege of Leningrad, famine in the Soviet Union led to countless acts of starvation-induced cannibalism, hushed by history and outside of crisis. There are those who still do it for fascination, fetish, or pathology. It's simply controlled, or at least. When we look back on the Neanderthals, gnawing marrow from broken femurs, we recoil, we judge, we flinch. But should we? What would we have done in their place? Imagine the blizzard howling outside, your children weak with hunger, no animals, no roots, nothing left. Do you starve, or do you survive? The Ice Age. The rules of morality bent to the will of the cold. Ethics meant nothing if you died before the thaw. And so we cannot simply label them monsters. It's not when survival forced such choices upon them and us. We didn't rise above cannibalism, just survived long enough to pretend we did. Why are we so haunted by this idea? Skyscrapers, satellites, oceans crossed in ours, genome sequenced in labs. Why does cannibalism, more than murder, war, or even genocide, leave such a deep psychological scar? Because it violates the final taboo, turns the body, the human form, the symbol of identity, dignity, and self into food. It reduces a person to flesh. It erases their name. It devours their memory. And in doing so, it forces us to ask, are we really so different from the creatures we once called beasts? Or are we just well-fed predators perched atop history's bones? Today, we can look across the world and see our dominance. But beneath it all, we are still just mammals with memories. Shaped by evolution, molded by fear, tempered by ice, and somewhere in our ancient blood, a part of us remembers what it took to survive. We remember the cold, the hunger, the taste. Neanderthals didn't vanish because they were lesser. They vanished because we were more numerous, more connected, more relentless. But in consuming them, whether by blade or by bloodline, we inherited not just their genes. We inherited their grief, their struggle, their final, desperate acts. We share their grave. We are the last humans standing. But are we truly different from those who came before? If tomorrow brought catastrophe, if the power failed, the crops died, the cities fell, how long would it take before the old instincts returned? Would we call it necessity? Would we call it sacrifice? Or would we call it exactly what it is, a memory? Because perhaps the truth is not that Neanderthals were cannibals, and we were not. Perhaps the truth is, we both were. And that deep down, in the marrow of our species, the cold hunger never left. It just sleeps.